Hello everyone, this is General Hand Grenade. Welcome to my war room in Prince George, British Columbia. One of the things that I noticed seemed to confuse a lot of people when I was at the Grasshopper Invitational and the day after when we were playing a game at Iron Stitch's house using my house rules. One of the things that seems to confuse a lot of people is scrambling. Um, Specifically scrambling into a zone where there isn't any boats. Like if you can see you've got boats in here, you think, okay, well I can add 3 fighters to those boats and on an amphibious assault. But one of the things that people just did not realize, okay, so there's no boats in there, no Russian boats in this case here, and so they bring in all their stuff and they fly their planes into the zone here and everything, and they bring their transports in, and then the guy chooses to scramble. And this happened a couple of times that I've seen, including a game that was played against us. They're saying, "What do you mean scramble? You don't have any defending ships in there. How can you scramble?" Well, you can. Like it says right in the rule book in scrambling. And let me show you the rule book here. This is the Pacific rule book. So on page 15 here, it talks about scramble here, okay? And it does talk about where you can scramble into a zone that is being attacked, or even an adjacent zone. As long as that you have an air base, you can scramble up to 3 fighters or tactical bombers. There doesn't have to be any defending ships. And one thing I want you to notice is that in the order of play here, this is scrambling happens before conduct combat. And that's very important, and because that brought up another question that somebody else had, and that is, could you attack the airbase? Like if you noticed those 3 planes there, and you wanted to so that they couldn't scramble, why couldn't you just come in here and do a strategic bombing raid against the airbase? The reason you can't do that is because a strategic bombing raid is the first thing that happens in conduct combat. However, like here, I'll show you. See down here, conduct combat, the strategic and tactical bombing raid. Before you get to conduct combat, you do the scramble. Scrambling is actually the last thing that you do on the combat movement phase. The attacker declares that they have no more attack moves, no more combat moves, and then that is when the defense chooses to either scramble or not, or even if you're talking about the Japanese, they could choose to do their kamikazes. Although it's not quite the same thing. Kamikaze is part of the combat, but still that happens before the strategic bombing raid. But just so you know though, scrambling does happen at the end of the movement phase, before combat begins. So this is not an option, what I was just talking about there. You can't just go in and attack the airbase so that these guys couldn't scramble the planes. So let's just move these back to where I had them. Okay, so this confuses a lot of people. Like in this case that I've got set up here, there's a submarine in here, right? Now, whether it's a submarine or a transport, and I know you don't often see a Russian transport because you don't start the game with one. So in either case, a transport or a submarine, you can choose to ignore that as the attacker. And the reason you would want to ignore that is so that you could do shore bombardment with your cruisers and your battleships. If you decide, okay, I've got a destroyer here, I'm going to take out this sub, and I'm going to do the amphibious assault here, then with your transports and your ground units, then you can't do the shore bombardment because you've created a sea battle. And that is the same if there is a transport there. It would be a defenseless transport in a hit that you don't even have to roll for. But you've turned this sea zone, and this is sea zone 115, you've turned the sea zone into a hostile sea zone by doing that. But anyway, like this is what people do though. They think, okay, I'm going to ignore this and I'm going to bring everything in. And you can see by the numbers here that Germany doesn't have overwhelming odds in this attack. So they're going to bring their planes in there, not thinking about the scramble, right? They're going to move these guys in. They're going to move these guys in, and then on the transports they're going to move these 8 units in here. Let's just put them out in the water here, okay? These guys are coming in on an amphibious assault. And they do, they move their stuff around wherever else they moved around, right? And then they say, okay, I'm ready to start rolling. And you say, wait a minute, I'm going to scramble. And they say, what do you mean scramble? There's no battle here. Yeah, but yes, there is. Like, you can create a battle if you have an air base and if you've got fighters and tactical bombers. You can create a sea battle before that. And when you look at the odds here, like Germany does have the odds. With everybody coming in here and the way I had it all set up, Germany has the odds in this battle. However, if you take out this landing force over here, there's 8 units there. There's 4 infantry, 2 artillery, and 2 tanks. Well, now all of a sudden Russia has the advantage over here, right? We could let's just move that guy in there too. So let's say that's what it looks like, and they think, okay, well, we've got these guys, right? As soon as we move these things in. But these guys decide to scramble, and this happened to me recently, and it wasn't because I didn't know the rule. It was just because I just completely forgot about it. Like, the planes were back here, in this sea zone, like I just forgot about it. I didn't notice it. But these are the things you have to be aware of. You always have to be aware when you're making an amphibious assault into a territory that has an airbase, and not just a territory that has an airbase. Like, even if you were going to Baltic states here, even if you were attacking this territory here, the fact that there's an airbase adjacent and connected to this waterway means that you could even scramble in here if they were attacking Baltic states. They don't have to be attacking the territory that contains the airbase. The airbase just needs to be adjacent to the territory where they're attacking from, or the sea zone that they're attacking from. Okay, so then you say, well, I'm going to scramble, and you look at why, right? They took their planes off of the ship. This doesn't get to attack. This has an attack value of 0. So all they have in there is a destroyer and a cruiser. So they got 1 at 2 and 1 at 3, and these guys have their own defense. So they got 2 at 4 and 1 at 3. And plus, when you do that, even though the Germans have chosen to ignore this submarine, when you create a sea battle as the defender, that brings the submarines and transports in, even though the transports wouldn't hit. But that all of a sudden makes the transports part of that battle. But anyway, in this case here, we've got the defender. Because they've chosen to do this, that means that the attacker cannot ignore this submarine any longer. And you'll find that's right in the rules. Like, if you go through the combat here, I'm not going to read you every little part of it, but like, here's amphibious assaults, and that's on page 17 of the Pacific Rulebook. And there's stuff that you'll find in here, right? But you have to keep reading, because then you have to go to general combat. And then it talks a little bit about what goes on in here. And then on the next page here, what happens if you turn back the assault, like the attacker retreats. So you have to keep reading. And then you even have to go to page 32 to find out about transports. They couldn't just list everything on one page that happens in this scenario, and that's why I'm making these videos of Know the Rules, is because you do have to look around. I think on this particular one here, I think I had to read 4 or 5 different pages, and I like to read things too, even though I was pretty sure I knew the rules. I like to read them anyway, just so I'm right up to date and absolutely certain. Like, I did not know about the sub. If I knew it in the past, I'd forgotten it. So the sub gets to take place in this battle because these have made it. So let's just say this battle takes place, and these guys lose all of this, and the sub is lost. And let's say the Russians lose this. And in that last round of combat, where the sea combat was taking place, let's say they also had one more hit than there was units here. Like, let's say on the last round, this guy was in here and this guy was in here, and these guys got 1 hit from the cruiser, and these guys got 2 hits, the 2 from the plane. So we take off 1 and 1, plus we take off 1 of the transports, and the cargo from that transport. So it has to be an infantry, right? And then we would also, like, it's attacker's choice. So he would choose the transport that had an artillery on it rather than choosing the one that has a tank on it, right? So there you go, and that's what happens. And so that screwed these guys right up. So what happens now is that the transport, the fully loaded transport at the end of that round of combat can choose to retreat. Like, they don't just stay there and these guys keep shooting at them. That's only on defense, where the transports are defenseless. If you are on attack, like these guys were, then you can always choose to retreat after a round of combat. So you've already lost one transport, and like, it'd just be silly for you to keep going. So you go back, okay? And you have to go to a zone where you came from. So like this one is pretty easy. Like, there was only one way to come in here. But when you look around over here, like, you might have come in from different sea zones or something. You have to retreat the transports in the direction that at least one of your boats came from. And in this case, there was only one way, so that was a pretty easy one to figure out. If you had done something like, let's say you had a transport here and two guys here, and the transport started in this water, and you decided to attack the United Kingdom here, and this guy decided to scramble, then the transport would be dead automatically, because he has no option to retreat. You had to have moved in here. Like, if this was here, right? Say these guys started here, and this guy moved in here, and you move these in here. Well, then this guy scrambles, and then he gets to roll. And let's say he misses, then the transport leaves. But the cargo has to stay on the boats. And that's the same over here. The cargo has to stay on there. You can't offload these units now that they've been in battle. They have to stay there. And the fighters now will stay here until the end of combat. And they can only fly one space after scrambling. Like, let's say the Germans take this out now. Then the Russians, in order for them to land these planes, they can only go one space, and you could land on a carrier if there was a Russian carrier here, which is unlikely, right? Or in this case here, there's Vyborg here, so they could land here at the end of their turn if the Russians lost the battle for Leningrad. Now, when you look at this battle now, though, this is not looking so good for the Germans. They've only got what? They got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 infantry here, 3 infantry over there, only 2 tanks, and two planes, a tactical bomber, and a couple of, did I mention the tanks? Like, they were counting on all of this stuff over here being in there. But now they're kind of screwed. But they have to do at least one round of combat. They can't just say, okay, screw it, I'm not going to attack now. I've lost the sea battle, and I'm just going to say, screw it, I'm just going to move them back and whatever. So what happens is they have to do at least one round of combat. And you never know. The Germans might get a bunch of hits and the Russians don't get any. It's unlikely, but that could happen, right? So let's just say the battle happens and we take off a bunch of these things, and then it becomes obvious that the Russians are going to win this battle. Like, there's no point in carrying on. Here, let's put this guy back. And the Germans, they lost some. Now what happens is they have the option of retreating, but only the units that were in on a land that came from land can retreat. Like, even if these guys had made it in, if they had made it past these guys and they were losing to the Russians in here, the units that came off of transports cannot retreat. They have to go through with the battle. So you have to keep your units that came off a transport separate from your other units that are coming in there, just so you know, okay, I'm going to lose these guys and not these guys. But that's not the case here, because these guys never made it to the land. So now the Germans decide, okay, this we're not going to win this battle, so we have to retreat. Now, if you remember, they came from the Baltic states and they came from Karelia, right? So they have to return to one of these two places, and all of those ground units have to return to the same place. You couldn't move a few infantry here and then the tanks over here. You have to move them all to one space or the other. You can't just choose some of them here and some of them there. So, and then the planes, that's normal plane movement. Like these planes, went, let's see, they came from this space over here, so they went 1, 2, and the other plane came from Poland. So all of these planes can go 2 spaces, and they can go anywhere they want as long as there's a legal landing space. So we're just going to send them down to Poland where they'd be nice and safe down there, right? And so that's what happens, but that kind of leaves them open up here, right? Like if they'd have put these things over here, then you know, like they could have chosen to put them here, or they could have chosen to put them here. Now the battle is over, and the German player finishes his turn. Now these things can fly back to Leningrad. Like they couldn't fly back there and take part in this battle. They can only do one thing. They can either scramble or they can take part in this battle. And as you've seen at the start of that, if I would have just kept my planes in here and let these guys land, then it's likely that the Russians would have lost this battle. But because I knew the rules and I calculated the odds, I knew that my planes were tougher than the warships that they had in there. I knew that I could use that extra submarine as cannon fodder. And then what was left here wasn't going to be able to take me out. So that's the kind of thing you want to do, right? You want to calculate, okay, where is it better? Like it could be that neither one was a good place to, you know, like I would have lost here or I would have lost in here. But ask yourself, okay, well, what can I take off with those planes, right? Like if the planes are in here, then you're probably just taking dudes off, right? But if you scramble the planes in here, then you might be taking off boats, and boats are worth more than dudes. But you know, like is there a battleship there? Is there an aircraft carrier there that they can soak up hits with without losing everything, right? So these are the kind of considerations that you need to ask yourself. Like this is very specific, this battle right here. But somewhere else, I mean, that might be a different story, right? You might not decide to scramble there. It just depends. It depends on what the numbers are. So then what happens after this? Now the German player finishes their turn. All these casualties are removed from the board, and then it's the Russian player's turn. Guess what the Russian player is doing with just one of these fighters? 1, 2. He's going out there, you know, like he bought all his stuff and he made his combat movements, and this was one of them. He came out here to attack a defenseless transport. Now, if Germany had an air base here, you know, they could scramble planes into that sea zone, or if they had some more warships, they could have brought them over and protected this. But that's all they had, and that's typically what you'll find in the Baltic Sea. Is in a case like this, is that there's only those transports left. And like I said, this happened to me just like a month ago or something. Rich Jerstad did this to me when I went in there, and I forgot all about his plane scrambling, and he did exactly this. Then he came out here and wiped all of this stuff out with just one plane. There you go. And then 3, 4, he non-combat moved back into there. Now another thing that is worth noting is that when you're scrambling, they don't have to be all of your planes, right? Like they could be Russian planes and a French plane, as long as the French player decides he wants to do that. And why wouldn't he, right? If you had the odds here. So when you're scrambling, it doesn't just have to be these planes. And then like it could be 3 planes from 3 different nations if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be the same one. And then another thing is, let's say you did do that, where you came in here and then you came in also over here. And I'm just going to put the transports on. I'm not going to put all the boats on. Now, in a case like this, where you're attacking from two different sea zones, an amphibious assault from 2 different sea zones into the same place, and they have the option of scrambling, well then you can still scramble, but you have to choose which way they're going. You can still only scramble 3 planes. You can't scramble 6 because there's 2 different zones, right? So let's say you scramble 2 into here and 1 into here, or none at all. Like you don't have to. Like you could scramble all 3 of them over here and then none into this one. You know, like if they had a battleship and a bunch of stuff here, but they were weak over here. Maybe you want to, or maybe they had more transports over here. Maybe this is the one you want to scramble into. And then the other thing is, here, let me move these over here now. I'll just I'll put them on the British Isles because this is a spot that you can do this on. So let's say that you have, let's say that the amphibious assault is coming into C zone 109 here. And this isn't likely, but you know, the fact that there's 3 Russian planes, just forget about that, okay? So let's say you're coming in here and attacking this zone. You have got planes, see that there's an air base here and an air base here. So you can scramble your planes. You can scramble 3 from each place. So you could scramble 3 from there, and you only have 1 here, so you scramble 1 here. If you had 3 planes in Scotland, you could scramble 3 planes from Scotland as well. And of course, you're not going to do that with just a transport there, right? You only need 1 plane. So, you know, it's kind of an exaggeration to do that. But let's just throw these things in here. Okay, that's why you would scramble 4 planes or 5 or whatever, right? Because you can. You can go in, like if you had 3 different places that you could scramble planes from, you know, say you had 3 air bases on that were connected to the same zone, you could do that as well, right? So anyway, I hope that clears some up for you. I can't believe how many people were completely flabbergasted that they had no idea. You know, like they moved all their stuff around and they were all excited. They were about to start rolling, and you say, "Wait a minute, I'm scrambling." "Oh, where are you scrambling?" And you scramble into into here. And they, "Oh, you can't do that. There's no battle there." "Well, yes, there is now. I just made one." "Well, you can't do that." "Well, you know, you want to take a look at the book there." You actually can. You know, they just. That's why I'm making this video, is to show people you can create a battle here. Even though there was no battle to begin with, the Germans, you know, ignored that submarine that was in there. You can create a battle simply by scrambling your planes in there, and you look what happened. They just, like, that was a big deal in this game. Like, it looked like the Germans were going to take Leningrad. They were going to get an extra 5 IPC bonus. You know, they were making headway into Russia, and then all of a sudden they lose their whole navy and eight ground units, you know, plus all the ground units they lost here because they didn't have much of an attack after that. So the Russians are they're just rubbing their hands together. You know, they're thinking, wow, you know, I'm glad I knew the rules and my opponent didn't, you know. So anyway, that's scrambling. So try to remember this, and like I said, if you need to prove it, then, you know, scrambling starts on page 15 there, and it's not part of the combat. It's part of the combat movement phase. It's the last thing you do in combat movement is scramble. So don't let them try to take your air base out so you can't scramble. That's just not part of the rules. And then you just have to read through the rest of it. Like I said, it's in a bunch of different places there, and I'm not gonna read it all to you. I just don't feel that ambitious tonight. So I hope that helps. Anyway, this is General Hand Grenade. Take care, everyone. Bye.